The storm outside battered the windows, a relentless percussion that mirrored the chaos inside Sloane's heart. She sat curled into the farthest corner of the couch, legs tucked under her, staring blankly at the flickering fire Luke had built. Its warmth barely touched the cold gnawing inside her. Cass's face haunted her. That forced smile. Those too casual words. The way she'd looked at Luke, not with suspicion, but guilt. It should have been comforting that Luke was still here, sitting a few feet away in the armchair, watching the storm with tense, brooding silence. It wasn't. Trust was a fragile thing now, a ghost she couldn't quite catch. "You're quiet," Luke said finally, his voice low and rough, breaking the heavy silence between them. Sloane swallowed hard. "I'm thinking," she said. "About Cass? About everything." She hesitated, twisting the fabric of her sweatshirt between her fingers. "About who I can trust." Luke turned his head, and for a moment their eyes locked, blue-gray clashing with green like two storms colliding. "You don't have to trust anyone," he said. "Not even me." Something in his voice cracked on that last word, something that made Sloane's chest ache. "But I want to," she whispered. "I want to trust you." Luke's hands flexed on the armrests as if holding himself back. "You don't know me, Sloane. Not really." "Then tell me," she said, surprising herself. "Tell me who you are, Luke, because right now I need someone." For a long moment he said nothing. Only the fire crackled, the storm howled, her heart pounded. Then Luke stood, slow and deliberate, and crossed the room. Sloane tensed, but he didn't come too close. He dropped down onto the floor across from her, keeping just enough distance to be respectful. To be safe. "I enlisted right out of high school," he began, voice low and almost hypnotic. "Army. Tours overseas. After my third deployment, I couldn't stay in anymore. Too much damage, too many things I couldn't fix." Sloane's breath caught. "I joined private security, worked jobs nobody else wanted, protected people who didn't even know my name." His mouth twisted bitterly. "Most of them didn't care. You were different." "Me?" she breathed. "You looked me in the eye," he said. "You said thank you. Like it meant something." Sloane blinked hard, fighting the sting of tears. "It does mean something," she said fiercely. Luke shook his head as if shaking off her words, but there was a crack in his armor now, a glimpse of the broken boy beneath the soldier's mask. "I don't know how to protect you from this," he said, almost to himself. "Not when it's coming from the people you love." He dragged a hand over his face, wariness written into every line of his body. "I'll fight for you, Sloane," he said hoarsely. "But you have to know, sometimes even when you do everything right, it's not enough." Sloane leaned forward before she could stop herself, her hand reaching out instinctively, and hesitated inches from his shoulder. She wanted to touch him. She needed to, but she didn't know if she was allowed. Luke looked up, and for the first time, he didn't look like the invincible bodyguard she knew. He looked human, hurting, lonely. Their hands met halfway, her fingers brushing his knuckles, tentative, trembling. The heat between them was electric, painful in its intensity. Luke closed his eyes for a moment, like he was memorizing the feel of her. Then, all at once, he pulled away, standing so fast the movement made her flinch. "I shouldn't be here," he rasped. "Luke." Before she could say anything else, his phone buzzed violently. He snatched it up, tension radiating off him. "Peter just called," he said grimly. "Someone leaked your security footage to the press, the break-in, the fight." Sloane's stomach dropped. "Who?" she whispered. "They're tracing it," Luke said. "But it came from Peter's office." Sloane staggered to her feet. Peter, the man who had discovered her, the man she trusted like a father. Her vision blurred. "No," she said brokenly. "He wouldn't." Luke caught her shoulders, steadying her. "Listen to me," he said urgently. "This doesn't change what's real. This doesn't change you." Sloane shoved away from him, hurt and rage boiling up in a wild tide. "Doesn't it?" she snapped. "Because it feels like everyone I've trusted is selling me off piece by piece." Luke flinched like she'd hit him. "I'm still here," he said softly. "I haven't left." But even as he said it, Sloane could see the fear in his eyes. Not fear for himself. Fear of himself. Fear that he wasn't enough to save her. Fear that maybe, just maybe, he was the one hurting her most by staying. Before she could respond, a crash echoed from the hallway. Both of them froze. Another crash, louder this time, and then the screech of the security alarm. Luke drew his weapon instantly, his entire body coiled and ready. "Get behind me," he barked. Sloane didn't argue. Heart hammering, she ducked behind him as he moved swiftly to the door. A shadow flickered down the hallway, too fast to make out. Luke's finger hovered near the trigger. "Who's there?" he shouted. No answer. Only the slamming of a door somewhere deeper in the house. Luke turned back to her. "Stay here," he ordered. "Luke, I mean it." And then he was gone, swallowed by the dark. Sloane stood there shaking, every instinct screaming at her not to listen. Because if Luke disappeared too, if she lost him, no, not again. She grabbed the nearest thing she could find, a heavy glass vase, and crept after him, adrenaline pounding so loud it drowned out reason. She might be hunted, she might be betrayed, but she wasn't going down without a fight. Not tonight. Not ever. The house was a labyrinth of shadows and fear. Sloane gripped the glass vase tighter, her heart slamming against her ribs so violently it hurt. Every creak of the wooden floors, every whistle of wind against the windows made her flinch. Where was Luke? She edged down the hall, feet silent against the polished wood, following the faintest hint of movement. The back door was ajar, letting the storm's fury inside, cold rain slanting in, soaking the floor. Had someone gotten out? Or was someone still inside? A muffled grunt broke the silence. Sloane spun toward it, nearly slipping in the rainwater, and bolted toward the sound without thinking. She burst into the study, just in time to see Luke wrestling with a man in black. The intruder was wiry, fast, but Luke was pure force, slamming the man against the wall with brutal efficiency. "Stay back!" Luke barked when he saw her, but Sloane was already moving, brandishing her pathetic weapon with a war cry. The vase shattered against the intruder's shoulder. Not much damage, but enough to distract him. Luke took advantage of the moment, wrenching the man's arm behind his back and slamming him to the floor. The intruder groaned. Luke wrenched off the man's ski mask, revealing a face Sloane recognized. Her blood turned to ice. It was Wes Carter, Peter's personal assistant, the man who had booked her press tours, fetched her coffee, joked with her like an old friend. "Wes," she whispered, horror clawing up her throat. Wes turned his head just enough to sneer at her. "You were supposed to be alone," he spat. "He promised." Luke jammed a knee into Wes's back, cutting him off. "Who?" Luke growled. "Who promised you?" Wes just laughed, a wet, broken sound. "You really don't get it, do you?" he said, turning the words toward Sloane. "You're not some untouchable princess. You're a product, a brand, and brands can be replaced." Sloane staggered back, bile rising in her throat. Luke looked ready to snap Wes's neck. "Who are you working for?" Luke hissed. But Wes only smiled, bloody, defiant, and said nothing. A siren wailed in the distance, fast approaching. "Move!" Luke ordered, dragging Wes to his feet. "We're not waiting for backup." He shoved the man toward the front door, but as they reached the foyer, another figure appeared, silhouetted against the flash of lightning. Sloane's heart seized. Peter. He looked different in the stormlight, older, grayer, worn down. "Sloane," Peter said, voice heavy with false warmth. "Are you all right?" Luke stiffened beside her. He smelled it too, the danger, thick and metallic in the air. "Stay where you are," Luke warned. Peter raised his hands, palms out. "Easy. I came as soon as I heard the alarm. I called the police." "How did you know about the alarm?" Luke asked, voice sharp. Peter blinked, a second too slow. "Everyone on the emergency contact list gets notified," he said smoothly. Sloane felt like she was standing on a frozen lake, every crack spidering closer to her feet. Luke's gun didn't waver. "You're not on the emergency contact list." Silence. The sirens grew louder, nearly here now. Peter's smile slipped. "Let's not do this," he said quietly. "Not here. Not now." Luke cocked the gun. "Now," he said grimly. Peter sighed, dropping the last of his act. The transformation was horrifying, from fatherly mentor to cold-eyed stranger. "You never should have gotten attached to her," Peter said, his gaze cutting into Luke. "You were supposed to be objective, professional." "You hired me," Luke said, fury simmering beneath the surface, "to protect her." Peter gave a humorless laugh. "No, I hired you to manage her." Sloane gasped, stepping back like she'd been struck. Peter's eyes flicked to her, full of something like pity, or maybe contempt. "You're too expensive, Sloane," he said. "Too stubborn, too much risk for the return." He shook his head slowly. "New faces come cheaper, easier to mold, and the sympathy bump after your tragic disappearance," he smiled thinly, "would have been priceless." Sloane couldn't breathe. "You were going to kill me," she whispered. Peter's smile didn't falter. It was nothing personal. The front doors burst open. Police flooding in, weapons raised. Peter lifted his hands, surrendering smoothly. Wes snarled but didn't resist as he was cuffed. Luke stayed by Sloane's side the entire time, never lowering his weapon until Peter was physically dragged away. Only when the chaos began to subside did Luke finally turn to her. She was shaking so hard her knees buckled, and Luke caught her before she hit the ground, scooping her into his arms like she weighed nothing. "It's over," he murmured against her hair. "You're safe." But Sloane knew better. The physical danger might be gone. The emotional wreckage was just beginning. She buried her face in Luke's chest, breathing him in, rain, smoke, leather, and clung to him like a lifeline. Because for the first time in her life, she realized she had no one else. Only him. Only Luke. And somewhere deep inside, she knew. She didn't just need him. She loved him. The hospital room was too bright, too sterile. Sloane sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the IV in her arm like it belonged to someone else. Outside the door, she could hear murmured voices. Cops, nurses, doctors. Luke's low rumble threading through it all, steady and grounding. She should have felt safe now. Peter was in custody. Wes, too. The nightmare was over, but Sloane had never felt more hollow. The betrayal ran deep. Not just Peter's scheme, but the ugly truth that no one had ever really loved her for who she was. She had been a product to Peter, a paycheck to her agent, a brand to the world. Even now, reporters were camped outside the hospital, frothing for a glimpse of America's sweetheart in her time of tragedy. Her fists clenched around the hospital blanket. Everyone wanted something from her. Everyone. Except Luke. The door creaked open. She didn't need to look to know it was him. She could feel it. The shift in the air, the heavy warmth of his presence. Luke stood in the doorway, looking like he hadn't slept in days. Dark circles bruised his eyes. His clothes were rumpled. His jaw was tight with tension. And yet when he looked at her, really looked at her, there was nothing but raw, aching tenderness. "Hey," he said, voice low. Sloane swallowed hard. "Hey." He stepped inside, closing the door gently behind him, as if afraid too much noise would break her. She watched him cross the room, heart thudding painfully. "You don't have to stay," she said, hating how small her voice sounded. "I'm sure the cops still need you." "They can wait," Luke said simply. He pulled the visitor's chair closer and sat, elbows on his knees, hands hanging between them. For a long moment, they just sat there in silence, the storm inside, both of them loud enough. Finally, Luke spoke. "I should have seen it sooner," he said, his voice rough with guilt. "I should have known Peter was behind it." Sloane shook her head. "It's not your fault." He gave a humorless huff. "I'm your bodyguard. It was literally my job to keep you safe." "You did," she said fiercely, surprising even herself. "You saved me." Luke looked down at his hands, big, battered, capable hands, like he didn't believe he deserved the credit. "I failed you," he muttered. Sloane felt something in her chest crack open, a rush of emotion, sharp and devastating. "You didn't," she whispered. "Luke, you're the only person who's ever stayed." His head snapped up, eyes burning into hers. Neither of them moved. The silence between them shifted from heavy to electric. Slowly, Sloane slid off the bed, Ivy stand trailing beside her, and lowered herself to her knees in front of him. Luke tensed. "Sloane," she reached for his hands, wrapping her smaller ones around his. "You were there when I was scared," she said, voice trembling. "You believed in me when I doubted myself. You fought for me when everyone else sold me out." Tears burned her throat, but she forced the words out. "You never treated me like a brand or a product. You just saw me." Luke's jaw worked like he was fighting a war inside himself. "I shouldn't feel this way," he rasped. "I'm supposed to protect you, not..." "Feel what way?" she breathed. His hands tightened around hers, and for a moment she thought he might pull away. But he didn't. Instead, he leaned forward, forehead pressing against hers. The contact was so gentle it shattered her. "I love you, Sloane," Luke whispered, like a man confessing a sin. "I fought it every damn day, but I can't anymore." Tears spilled down her cheeks, hot and silent. "I love you too," she said, voice breaking. Luke pulled back just enough to see her face, his thumb brushing away her tears with infinite tenderness. "You don't have to say it," he said hoarsely. "Not because you're grateful or scared or..." "I'm saying it because it's true," she interrupted, fierce and shaking. "I love you, Luke Hunter. Not the bodyguard, not the protector. You." For a beat, neither of them moved. Then Luke surged forward and kissed her. It wasn't soft, it wasn't tentative, it was desperate, all-consuming, a collision of everything they had tried to deny. Sloane clung to him, her fingers tangling in his hair, anchoring herself to the only real thing she had left in the world. When they finally broke apart gasping, Luke rested his forehead against hers again. "I'm not going anywhere," he vowed, voice raw with emotion. "Not now. Not ever." She believed him. For the first time in a long, long time, she believed. She would heal, she would rebuild, but she wouldn't do it alone. She had Luke, and somehow that made all the difference. Outside the window, the rain had stopped. A sliver of sunlight broke through the clouds, warm and golden. Hope, real, blinding, terrifying hope. Sloane smiled through her tears and kissed him again, sealing the promise between them. Together. Always. 1 year later, the ocean breeze carried the scent of salt and sun-drenched wildflowers as Sloane tilted her face up toward the sky, letting the warmth kiss her skin. Freedom. Real freedom. She sat barefoot on the wooden steps of the cottage she now called home, a tiny, weather-worn place tucked away on the Oregon coast, far from the flashing cameras and suffocating expectations of her old life. No screaming paparazzi, no bodyguards in the shadows, no Peter, just peace and Luke. Her gaze drifted to where he was chopping wood near the tree line, shirtless and gloriously golden in the afternoon sun, muscles flexing with each powerful swing. Sloane smiled to herself. She still couldn't believe he was hers. After the hospital, everything had changed. She had fired her entire management team, sold her Los Angeles mansion, walked away from contracts that would have made her even richer, but at the cost of her soul. The world had been shocked. They called it a breakdown in the tabloids. But it hadn't been a breakdown. It had been a breakthrough. With Luke by her side, she'd rebuilt her life piece by piece, on her own terms. She still acted, but now she chose smaller, more meaningful projects. Indie films, theater, roles that fed her spirit, not just her bank account. And every night, no matter where she went, Luke was there. Not as her bodyguard, not as her shield, as her partner, her home. "You're staring," Luke said without looking up, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Sloane laughed and stood, brushing sand from her jeans as she made her way down to him. "Can't help it," she teased, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind. "You're very aesthetically pleasing." He chuckled, setting the axe aside and turning in her arms. "So are you," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her forehead. They stood there for a moment, wrapped around each other, the rhythm of the ocean and their heartbeats weaving a quiet symphony. Sloane tucked her face against his chest, breathing him in. "You ever miss it?" she asked softly. "The old life?" Luke thought for a moment, his hand rubbing slow, lazy circles on her back. "I miss the paycheck," he teased, earning a laugh from her. Then more seriously, "But no, I don't miss pretending to be invisible. I don't miss standing on the sidelines, watching you light up a room and knowing I couldn't touch you." Sloane's throat tightened. "You can touch me now," she whispered. "Yeah," Luke said, his voice rough with emotion. "And I'll never take that for granted." He pulled back to look at her, his gaze dark and serious. "You scared me back there, Sloane. When Peter took you, I thought I'd lost you." "You didn't," she said fiercely. "You never will." A shadow crossed his face. "I should have told you sooner about how I felt." She cupped his cheek, her thumb brushing the faint scar along his jawline, a souvenir from the fight to get her back. "We found our way," she said. "That's what matters." Luke leaned into her touch, closing his eyes for a brief moment. Then he reached into the pocket of his jeans. Sloane blinked as he pulled out a small, weathered box. Her heart slammed against her ribs. "Luke," she breathed. He opened it, revealing a simple, beautiful gold band, understated and perfect. "No guards," he said. "No agents, no scripts, just me and you." Sloane's hands trembled as he dropped to one knee in the sand, looking up at her with so much love it stole the air from her lungs. "I love you," Luke said, his voice steady. "I want to spend the rest of my life protecting you, not from stalkers or kidnappers or anything else, but from loneliness, from fear, from anything that tries to steal that light inside you." Tears blurred her vision. "I don't want the fame. I don't want the spotlight. I just want you. Always." He took a shaky breath. "Sloane Winters, will you marry me?" She dropped to her knees in front of him, laughing through her tears. "Yes," she gasped. "God, yes." Luke let out a choked laugh and slipped the ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. Simple, strong, eternal. Just like them. He kissed her then, slow and reverent, like a prayer. The ocean roared behind them, the seagulls cried overhead, and for the first time in her life, Sloane felt truly, completely whole. Later that evening, they sat wrapped in a blanket on the porch, watching the sun sink into the sea. Luke's arm was around her shoulders. Sloane rested her head on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart under her ear. "Think the world will freak out when they find out?" she teased. He chuckled. "Let 'em. We earned this." She smiled and snuggled closer. They had earned this. The pain, the fight, the healing. They had faced the worst parts of themselves and found something extraordinary in each other. Not a fairy tale, not a perfect, shiny Hollywood ending. Something better, something real. Sloane closed her eyes, letting herself dream of a future with Luke. A little house, a messy garden, maybe even a dog or two. Laughter and love and the kind of peace that didn't need an audience. A life she chose, a love she built. And this time no one would take it away. If you enjoyed this tale of love, betrayal, and redemption, don't forget to subscribe. More heart-pounding adventures and unforgettable romances are just around the corner. Stay tuned, and we'll see you in the next story.